This should be an interesting weekend, I think. Well, first of all, seeing the title of the retreat weekend, is anyone scared? Is anyone scared? Be not afraid, as the opening hymn said, be not afraid. So we'll begin with that. Well, it's going to be interesting because a few sort of I don't say a blast from the past for some of the people I recognize, and like, let's say, either previous assignments or activities I was involved with, especially with youth, or believe it or not, my second grade teachers here. So yeah, how about that? So it should be good. It should be good. So also a few initial questions. Who's read the screw tape letters? If you haven't, that's okay, because we'll do a little bit of reading together, but I'll talk about how much I like it. Who's read Father Gallagher's Discernment of Spirits? Who's read that? So a few less people, that's okay. That's okay. We'll talk a little bit about the discernment of spirits and the rules. Who's experienced a directed retreat using St. Ignatius's spiritual exercises? Has anyone gone like through let's say a 4-day, an 8-day, even a 30-day exercise? Okay, that's good. Who's familiar with just the discernment of spirits from somewhere else? Anyone familiar with this from somewhere else? Okay. Just sort of curious, it may not really change the way I approach things, because really the way I'm going to approach things, except for the homilies I'm going to talk at you, but for much of the retreat, when we gather, it'll be, you can almost say, a little bit more seminar style, where we'll do some reading together, I'll do a little bit of talking, but then a chance for maybe some question and answers as we delve into this, really, I think, a very helpful thing. And I'll talk more about that tomorrow. But tonight, I just want to maybe give a little introduction. And really, today's gospel and Jesus' work of driving out demons is really pretty appropriate to begin this retreat, because it allows us to consider the fact that the devil's real. And he's at work in certain ways in our lives. And as a way to introduce this, I like to read the first paragraph of chapter 7 of the screw tape letters. And so you got to put your mind in sort of the thought that this is a demon. This is like a senior demon, screw tape, talking to an apprentice demon, wormwood. And so I'm not going to like do like a weird voice, but just try to imagine this. And I can't speak like a British person either. So just you're going to get my Nebraskan voice here. But it goes like this. My dear Wormwood, I wonder you should ask me whether it is essential to keep the patient in ignorance of your own existence. That question, at least for the present phase of the struggle, has been answered for us by the High Command. Our policy for the moment is to conceal ourselves. Of course, this has not always been so. We are really faced with a cruel dilemma. When the humans disbelieve our existence, we lose all the pleasing results of direct terrorism, and we make no magicians. On the other hand, when they believe in us, we cannot make them materialists and skeptics, at least not yet. We have great hopes that we shall learn in due time how to emotionalize and mythologize their science to such an extent that what is in effect a belief in us, though not under that name, will creep in while the human mind remains closed to belief in the enemy. And when he says enemy here, he's talking about God. God is his enemy. The life force, the worship of sex, and some aspects of psychoanalysis may prove useful. If once we can produce our perfect work, the materialist magician, the man not using but veritably worshiping what he vaguely calls forces while denying the existence of spirits, then the end of the war will be in sight. But in the meantime, we must obey our orders. I do not think you will have much difficulty in keeping the patient in the dark. The fact that devils are predominantly comic figures in the modern imagination will help you. If any faint suspicion of your existence begins to arise in his mind, suggest to him a picture of something in red tights. and persuade him that since he cannot believe that it is an old textbook method of confusing them, he therefore cannot believe in you. So I'll let you read it on your own too, if you didn't catch everything there. But it even makes me wonder, so just the fact that that he says here that if they can produce the materialist magician, the man not using but veritably worshiping what he vaguely calls forces while denying the existence of spirits, the end of the war will be in sight. I wonder if the end of the war is in sight, because there's a lot of people that don't believe in God, don't believe in angels, don't believe in the devil, but they believe in these life forces or other vague things. And so this evening, I just want to share a little bit of demonology. And again, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. But it's good just to cover a little bit, a few things, and some quotes from the Catechism, but also just some descriptions of things that you might have heard about, but maybe just to be a little bit more clear. First of all, just again, I'm going to say the devil is real, but we're not to be consumed with fear about him. To use the words of the Catechism, behind the disobedient choice of our first parents lurks a seductive voice, opposed to God, which makes them fall into death out of envy. Scripture and the church's tradition sees in this being a fallen angel called Satan or the devil. The church teaches that Satan was at first a good angel made by God. The devil and the other demons were indeed created naturally good by God, but they became evil by their own doing. It goes on to say, the power of Satan is nonetheless not infinite. He is only a creature, powerful from the fact that he is pure spirit, but still a creature. He cannot prevent the building up of God's reign. Although Satan may act in the world out of hatred for God and his kingdom in Christ Jesus, and although his action may cause grave injuries of a spiritual nature and indirectly even of a physical nature to each man and to society, the action is permitted by divine providence which with strength and gentleness guides human and cosmic history. It is a great mystery that providence should permit diabolical activity. We know that in everything, God works for good with those who love him. And I think that's important. We know that in everything, God works for good with those who love him. And so the enemy, he is working in our world. And make a little bit of a distinction, talk about extraordinary versus ordinary activity of the enemy. And when I say the enemy, most of the time I'm talking about the devil. Now, when we get to the screw tape letters, you have to sort of wrap your brain around the fact that for screw tape, the enemy is God. But usually when I talk about the enemy, I'm talking about the devil, Satan. And so when you're talking about extraordinary activity of the enemy, like if you remember, like there was a movie back in the 1970s called The Exorcist. We're talking about the extraordinary activity there. Like for instance, sometimes you hear about, we call it infestation, or another way of describing like the haunted house. That this is demonic activity on like inanimate objects, like a house, a space, an item. And we can respond to this typically, let's say, with a blessing. Like if you haven't had a priest come over to bless your house recently, it's always a good thing to do. Always a good thing to do. But like a blessing an item, even something like a minor exorcism can be a way to respond to infestation, that is demonic activity on an inanimate object. There's also what's called oppression, which are physical attacks on the person. Maybe it's I don't know if you've heard stories about St. John Vianney. It's sort of an extreme case where actually the devil would shake his bed, knock him around, and that'd be an example of oppression. But also, it can come in the form of like diagnosable diseases or illnesses. That sometimes the enemy is working in a physical way. And so a response like deliverance ministry, or even like a minor exorcism, can be a way of responding to this idea of oppression. Then there's obsession. And this is where the enemy, he communicates mentally with a person, let's say in a time of crisis, suggesting obsessive thoughts and images, which maybe for a normal person, they seem absurd, but for the victim, they're powerless to reject them. And so the idea of obsession. And especially when we're dealing with, let's say, a person also has, let's say, mental illness or something like that, it can be hard to diagnose, or even sometimes you have to respond to both at the same time. But again, responses can include things like deliverance ministry, unbound, or a minor exorcism. And then there's possession. And this is a sort of temporary substitution of the personality during which a brutal, violent, and despotic fallen angel, and sometimes even more than one, acts inside the body of a person and makes them speak and act according to its wishes, while the victim is really powerless to resist. And these are very rare. These are very rare, maybe because of we're entering into a society and world that's becoming less Christian. We might see more instances of this, but nonetheless, it's very rare. And something like a major exorcism would be the response, but then also this is very rare and comes only after making sure there's not other causes for the behavior. Again, things like mental illness or maybe something physical going on. And I mentioned these because this weekend is not about extraordinary activity. So again, if you're sort of, as you hear me talk about these things, you're going, I'm scared. Don't be scared. Don't be scared. But this weekend is not about this. Don't be consumed by a fear of this extraordinary activity, the sacraments, the fact that you're baptized. You go to confession, you receive the Eucharist. That's your main defense right there. That's really important. And so that's one reason why you shouldn't be worried. Sacramentals like blessings, holy water, these are good protection for this extraordinary activity in most instances. Again, I don't want to discount the reality of this extraordinary activity, but really we should be more consumed about the ordinary activity of the enemy, the devil. And that's what this weekend's about. Keep in mind in Matthew chapter 10, where Jesus says, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in Gehenna. That this really should be our approach or our attitude towards the ordinary versus the extraordinary. And so let's come to this ordinary activity again. This is what the whole weekend's about, in particular looking at what we call the discernment of spirits. And so the ordinary activity of the enemy is temptation and desolation. And I like how Father Timothy Gallagher defines both. He says that in Rule 12, Ignatius amplifies the title of the enemy to the enemy of human nature, to emphasize that the enemy is against what is natural to the human person. In exploring the enemy's tactics, Ignatius here shifts the focus slightly from spiritual desolation to temptation. He says this, Father Gallagher, spiritual desolation is an effectively heavy moment, sadness, disquiet, agitation, and so forth, on the level of our life of faith. Temptation is simply a deceptive suggestion of the enemy. Why not let your prayer go until later, in parentheses, that may come without heavy affective moments or movements, or even, at least initially, with a sense of attraction. He says, spiritual desolation and temptations are the work of the enemy for the same ultimate purpose, to harm us spiritually and hinder us from growing closer to God. The manner in which we respond to these temptations in their beginning will determine whether they will diminish or take increasingly hold of us. And so that there is the ordinary activity, temptation and desolation. And just consider that the ordinary activity of the enemy even affected Jesus, who was tempted and he experienced desolation. Like think of the temptations in the desert. That's a prime example. But also think of the Last Supper, where his heart is heavy as he celebrates this last Paschal meal with his apostles before his passion. The Garden of Gethsemane. Father, if this cup can pass from me, let it be so, but not my will, but yours be done. The cross. Think of he recites Psalm 22, my God, why have you abandoned me? And so Jesus himself faced this temptation and this desolation. And so do we dare think that we're any different? Just recently, there's a beautiful little article in Magnificat, Father Sebastian White. he sort of focuses upon this when he asks, well, he uses the words of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 10. It is enough for the disciple they become like his teacher, for the slave that he become like his master. And Father White says, though this verse from the Gospel of Matthew does not rank among the best known or most quoted verses in the Bible, it is one I often ponder. In fact, there was a distinct moment when, having read that verse for the umpteenth time, I felt something click, or as if a light had switched on. Yes, that is precisely what it means to be a Christian, I thought. Become like Jesus, our teacher and master. But Jesus bore the cross. He goes on to say, of course, this is such a fundamental and familiar truth of the faith that on one level I already knew it. But in that moment, I realized that deep down, I had effectively formed the expectation that if I did my part and was faithful to God, then my life should go better than Jesus did. People often find it funny when I put it that way, but it's true. Thus, this particular verse has become for me a kind of examination of conscience, especially in the face of trials or when sacrifices are demanded. I ask myself, but is it enough for me? Am I content to become like Jesus, my teacher and master? Or do I expect something else, something supposedly better, a life completely free of suffering, where I'm always affirmed and everything goes my way? So I really like that. So this weekend, we'll be taking a look at a little bit about temptation, but mostly looking at this idea of desolation and what C.S. Lewis talks about as the law of undulation. We'll talk about that tomorrow. So we'll leave it at that. On a little bit different note, I offer you an optional assignment for tomorrow for the first conference. And if you don't have a copy of the screw tape letters, I brought a few extra copies that you can pick up. But if you want to do this, if you want to get to bed, you can do that too. But if you want to read the first two chapters of the screw tape letters, that's a little optional assignment for this evening. You're welcome to read more. I know for me, sometimes when I begin to read, it's hard to stop, but don't go past chapter 7. Don't go past chapter 7 because first of all, you'll need the rest tonight. And then second of all, we'll be talking about chapters 8 and maybe chapter 9 if we get to it. It depends on how much I talk, how much you talk. And we'll take a look at especially chapter 8 tomorrow. And also our conferences will be more seminar style in the library. And so during the rest of the time, I do encourage you to observe the silence. The silence is very important. But during the conferences themselves, it'll be a little bit more interactive. I will say some things, we'll read some things together, and it'll give you a chance for some question and answer too. But otherwise, for the rest of the time, try your best to remain quiet.